If you owned anything American, okay, call it like real estate if you want, call it stocks. I know a lot of you probably own stuff like Apple or Amazon stock. When you own American assets in any capacity like that, you're opening up the gates to being taxed by the US if something happens to you and you die. So the Americans have an estate tax. And when you own assets over a certain threshold in value of the American asset, well, then they look at your entire portfolio, so your entire asset holding upon death, and you might be charged some sort of estate tax on that stuff. So if you own a property in the States, for example, you've got family that owns a vacation rental or vacation property in Florida, pretty common. A lot of snowbirds in Canada. If they have properties in the States, something happens to them, well, they're opening the door to being looked at by the IRS as well as a CRA. There are treaties between the countries to allow for this. It gets actually very punitive if the numbers get really high, and you might be looking at a significant tax liability if you're not holding these assets properly in your name. Look, what I'm saying is you want to own assets like Apple and Amazon and Nvidia, or you want to own property, you could do this kind of stuff. Just have to be careful in how you structure it. So easy way to avoid getting any of that complexity in your life, if you're talking about buying stock, which is pretty common, is if you didn't own the asset directly, like if you didn't own Apple shares directly, but you owned it through an ETF or a mutual fund in Canada. Okay, so you own it here, you own the mutual fund or you own the ETF, it owns the Apple stock. Well, that's a different story now. You directly don't own that. That's one way of getting around and protecting yourself from the liability that is inevitable if your assets continue to rise and you hold US assets. So if you got exposure at all, it's best to look at this now while you can, while the numbers are still manageable, before it gets to a massive highs, which is going to contribute to the possibility of massive taxation on you. And if you know me, you know I'm not a big fan of massive taxation. Well, there's an example of how you probably didn't realize you're opening up that can of worms. But if you own American stuff, it's worth looking into. You can start by calling me how this affects you when you pass. What kind of taxation are you facing? Now go on, get wealthed up.